Hi, I'm Paulette from Tulip Square. This is the hard part. And today I'm going to show you how to make this cute little sewing organizer, mat and caddy kind of a thing. Goes under your sewing machine, got lots of pockets to organize your notions, and it's got a nice little removable scrap bin that kind of looks like a French fry basket, but it's a scrap bin. So we're going to head over to the sewing machine and we're going to make this cute thing. And it is fat quarter friendly. This took 4 fat quarters. So let's head over to the sewing machine. Okay, to make this little sewing mat organizer, you're going to need 2 full fat quarters, and I've got 2 here with batting in between, and I'm going to quilt these 2 together, and then I've got a third one that's not a full fat quarter, and I've just folded it in half and put another piece of batting in between, and I'm also going to quilt that. And then a 4th fat quarter I cut up into binding. Now you don't have to use a fat quarter for binding. I just did because it matches this stuff nicely. You can just use other fabric for your binding, but other than that you would need 3 fat quarters. So I'm going to go ahead and do some quilting on these, and then we're going to get started on putting the whole thing together. Okay, I've got the quilting done. It's just a simple grid and it's all finished, and then I just trimmed it to size. It doesn't have to be exact because of what it is, but I just wanted it nice and square, so I just cut it all nice and square. And then if you haven't done so yet, you need to go prep all your binding strips. And we're going to use one of the shorter ones first. And I'm just going to sew it to one short end of the big quilting mat, of the big sewing mat. I'm just going to sew this to one end and then fold it over and sew it to the other side. That's sewn in place. Now I'm just going to flip this over, fold it up, and stitch it down all along this edge, stitching as close to this folded edge as possible. Okay, that's done. Now, since I like this side better than this side, this is the side that's going to be folded up for my pockets. So what I like to do is put it down, and I'm going to fold this up. Pockets seem to be good at about 4.5 to 5 inches deep. So I'm going to fold this up and measure the pockets. I've got just about exactly 4.5 inches, okay? So I'm going to clip those so they stay where they're supposed to be. And this will be the part that's under your sewing machine, and this will be the part with the pockets that hang over. So the pockets actually are more visible than the top of the mat. Okay, so I'm going to sew the binding on it, but I'm going to put the binding on this side, so when I flip it over and do the second sewing, it's on the other side. All right, when I start, I'm going to leave a little more than 1/2 inch hanging off the edge there, and then I'm just going to sew all the way down this edge, sew the binding down, and then when I get to the corner, I'll show you how I do the corners. Okay, when I'm sewing and I get close to the corner edge, I'm going to stop about 1/4 inch before I get to this edge. Take it out from under the machine, cut the thread, and then I'm going to turn it to start sewing the next edge. But first, I'm going to take the binding and I'm going to fold it up so that this edge is nice and straight and even. And then I should have a nice 90-degree angle here. And when I've got that just how I want it, I like to take a ruler to hold this nice and straight. And I lay the ruler here and I fold the binding down on top of it. Now this should make your binding line up perfectly with this edge. And then I'm going to pull the ruler out and I'm going to start sewing at the corner. And then I'm going to sew to the other corner and do the same thing. I'm going to leave a little bit hanging off and cut off the rest of the binding. Okay, now we're ready to turn it over. To make a nice finished corner here, I like to take this little tab we left and fold it in just a little bit more. I don't want it just straight up like that. I want it in a little bit so it doesn't show. And then I'm going to fold it down, and then I will I'll fold the binding over so it's ready to be sewn down. And then I've got a nice finished edge. A back tack here and then sew this whole side. And when I get to the corner, I'll show you how I make my corners here. Okay, when I get about just a couple inches from the end here, I'm gonna go and fold up the binding on the next side. So I'm gonna show you, you just pull this up, make that go all the way across, and then bring it down. And when you sew right to that point. Keep sewing and do the same thing at the next corner. Now when you get down to this end, right, make it a little bit closer. I'm going to do the same thing I did at the beginning. First I'm going to get that thread out of my way. I'm going to push this a little bit more than straight up. Then I'm going to fold it up and fold the rest of the binding over it. So you've got a nice finished edge. Next we decide where we want our pockets. Do you want skinny pockets? Do you want wide pockets? Whatever you like. Now over here we're going to have the little scrap bin. So do maybe 3 small pockets and then leave the rest open for a bigger spot, plus the bin will be here. So when you do the pocket lines, just make sure you're going straight, measure it and mark it, and make sure you back tack at both ends. Okay, that's all done. I left this big pocket. I've got 3 medium-sized pockets over here. We're going to set this aside and we're going to work on the scrap bin. So I've got the scrap bin piece cut out, and there's a pattern for it in the pattern, of course, a template for it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to serge or zigzag all the way around all of these edges so they're nicely finished off, but not the top edge. Top edge we're going to bind in a minute, but first I'm just going to finish these off. All right, I've got all the edges sort of serged, some kind of decorative stitch on my sewing machine. Now we're going to take and bind this top edge. So you're going to take one of your shorter pieces of binding and we're going to sew it right along this top edge. And I'm going to start, and I'm going to leave like a 1/2 inch or so, 3/4 of an inch on this edge. We're going to go ahead and just sew along. Okay, I've sewn the binding to the top edge, and when you get to this little curve, just take it slow so you can keep your 1/4 inch seam and just do a little bit at a time and adjust it. And then I'm going to, when I did cut off that little thing I thought I needed, I'm going to turn this to the other side and stitch it down. And I didn't trim the other end off yet. Okay, and I've got the little extra tab on this end, which I should have left on this end, but I didn't, but we'll still make it work. Okay, now decide which, you should have decided by now which is your right side. This is going to be my right side, where the stitching follows the pattern, and the wrong side where it kind of goes in between. So I'm going to put wrong sides together and sew this back seam. Just this back seam here from the binding all the way down, and make it a nice, healthy, generous 1/4 inch seam, and do some back tacking at the top and bottom. I'm going to go press this seam open. Okay, so that seam is pressed nicely open. Now this is the outside of my bit, but next I'm going to turn it inside out, and I'm going to sew this bottom seam right here, just right across here. Okay, now you've got this. So I'm just going to flatten this over a little bit. It would be really hard to press it open, so I'm just going to finger press it. And then I'm going to take one of these and I'm going to fold it right against that side seam, like so. Then I'm going to sew right along here, making sure to back tack and try to keep that bottom seam nice and flat when you're sewing this. Got that one sewn. I'm just going to turn it around and do the other one, and this one should line up, so that seam and this seam should be lined up with each other, and sew a nice 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to turn it back to right side. Now you've got all little finished corners and seams in your inside of your little trash bin here. Okay, now I've got this little bin turned right side out, and we're ready to go to the next step. We're going to do a little hand sewing. So on the back side of it, I'm going to go about 1.5 inches on each side of the back seam, and I'm going to hand sew one of these ponytail elastics. Or you can just use 1/4" elastic and make it into a little loop, but I find the ponytail elastics are kind of handy. And I'm just going to sew them here and here. Make sure you stitch them nice and securely. Okay, I've got my little mouse ears sewn on. They're just tacked on the back. And I tacked down these little edges too. But they're nice and secure. And now all that's left to do is take our mat out again and decide where we want these to hang, and wherever they're going to hang is where we're going to sew to shank buttons. I got some funky looking buttons here, but like here, like here and here. I could put them up there. If I preferred, I could put them down a little lower. I could put them way down here if I wanted this thing completely out of the way. Use that pot. I could put it way down like this. I think I'm going to put them down about here on this pocket. Down here, so that I have the little scrap in here and I still have full use of this pocket. So I'm going to sew them 3 inches apart and even. So wherever you put them, make them even and 3 inches apart. And make sure you don't sew all the way through your pocket when you put these on. Shank buttons work better. These are kind of funky looking shank buttons, but use what you got, right? There, I've got my button sewn on. And then these will just hang here. And there's your little scrap bin, or for M&Ms or Skittles or whatever other necessities you have in your sewing room. And that's all there is to it. Our little sewing mat organizer is all finished. And so now you know how to make a nice little sewing caddy with a useful little scrap bin for your sewing room or for someone else's sewing room. It'd make a nice gift. And I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you like it, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the little bell if you'd like to be notified when we put up a new video every 2 weeks, every first and third Saturday of every month. So I hope you have a good week sewing, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.